Good evening, everybody. We will start shortly. So thank you, everyone, for joining in our today's panel discussion on job prospects for new graduates in social and biomedical sciences. So this panel discussion is jointly organized by Ergon Professional Hub and by University of Arizona's Psychology Department's Professional Development Committee, which is created by like one of our friend, Caroline Doyle. So before we start, I just want to, for people who don't know what Ergon Professional Hub is, it is a community of professionals working collaboratively to help each other with careers and skill development. Ergon is, as a group, we like to help individuals with every aspect of their career, whether it's entering the workplace, finding a new job, or breaking into a new industry. Members of Ergon share their resources, their knowledge, empowering everyone to evolve, learn, and grow together professionally. Our mission is to provide a community where professionals gather to unlock the potentials of their careers. So I would like to hand over the baton of introducing the speakers to my friend Caroline Doyle, who is a graduate student in clinical psychology from University of Arizona. And Caroline is, I have to say, I mean, this whole panel discussion is a brainchild of hers, and we are deeply indebted to her and bring forth the ideas. So I would let her introduce the speakers and the rest of the proceedings for today's evening. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Rosine. Hi, everybody. Okay, so we have 3 panelist members tonight who are going to speak with us. We have Dr. Andrea Baccarelli. He is the Leon Hess Professor and Chair of the Environmental Health Sciences Department and the Director of the Lab of Precision Environmental Biosciences at the Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health. As an epigeneticist and board-certified clinical endocrinologist, Dr. Baccarelli's research explores epigenetic and molecular mechanisms as potential functional pathways linking exposures to environmental pollutants to human disease. And Dr. Baccarelli is currently the PI of multiple NIH-funded projects. Our second panelist member is Dr. Kathleen Sickema. She is the Stephen Smith Professor and the Chair of Sociomedical Sciences at the Columbia University. She is a clinical psychologist who specializes in health and community psychology, and Dr. Sikkema has led pioneering scholarship in global mental health, specifically related to traumatic stress, coping, and gender violence. And she's been funded by the NIH for nearly 30 years, and her research program has focused on community-level HIV prevention trials, mental health interventions, and university community research collaboration. And then finally, we have Dr. Renzo Canetta with us, and he's the former Vice President of the Global Research and Development Oncology Policy at Bristol-Myers Squibb. He's board certified in clinical and laboratory hematology, and he joined Bristol-Myers Squibb in 1980 and held numerous leadership roles there, including head of clinical cancer research and head of development and lifecycle management. So we just want to welcome all of our panelists here. Thank you so much for being here tonight and speaking with us. So next, I'll just throw up some slides here with some of our questions on them. Okay, so here is our first set of questions. I thought I would put them all up here. And Andrea, if you want to jump in and just kind of...
Yeah. Absolutely. So I will also serve as a moderator tonight. So we start with this first set of questions, and that are mostly related to COVID and the current situation. But of course, we will be also most likely expanding to what happens in science in general and in the market in general. And the questions are about the job market, how it is changing right now because of COVID, and how it will change in the future. And the follow-up question is whether do we have any certainty on what is going to happen, or is the picture largely uncertain? And finally, whether in recent searches we found the competition to be more than usual for jobs or the same. So I would invite either Dr. Sikkema or Dr. Canetta, and I think I'm going to switch to first name immediately since we know each other pretty well, to chime in. And Kathy, do you want to start first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I appreciate it. Thank you. I'll just say a couple of contextual things, and then we can hopefully have some conversation about this. Just to note that I'm currently in a public health school. I've been a chair in this department for a little over a year, and I came from Duke University within Arts and Sciences in the psychology department. So my specific questions, my responses for tonight will be based on the last year, but I think I can also, in discussion, make comments about other areas that might be relevant for the group. So I think in some of these, actually, my response may jump a little bit ahead to what's happening, but they're related. First of all, we, like many universities, are in a hiring freeze, and so these questions about the job market are greatly impacted by that. I will say, at least in my situation, some faculty recruitment that we were doing in my department last year got put on hold, but we've been able to make the case for a couple of our recruits, so that we're actually in the process. I just interviewed 3 people in the last month, and we were given permission, even within that hiring freeze, to pursue the people that we had already planned to interview. So I know universities are handling that differently, in what ways they're adhering to what a hiring freeze is. Some have no consideration at all. And then there may be exceptions, at least within Columbia, that we've been able to make, not get all of them, but try to make the case for. And I'll be honest, within a public health school, at least, because many of us live on grant money, the more likely someone is to have grant support that's one argument to make, because so much of this is driven by financial issues, which is part of the frustration of it all. There couldn't be a more important time for public health or advances in medicine or the value of science, and how do we turn science into policy and advocacy. I mean, I think I would just say that this short term is a really stressful time, and I feel for all of you. And I would say, when we come out of this, what we have to hope is that once we get on our financial firmer grounds, that we, in areas of public health and social change and science and advocacy and global issues, which is where I work, that we should hope for change. That and that may not help in the short term in terms of limited, not this full scope of position announcements that are normally out there. So I think it's highly competitive right now. Many places are not hiring. Many universities some departments aren't accepting doctoral students. I don't know what situations you're in your departments right now. So we know times are tough. Optimist that I am, that when we come out of this, these fields will be very important. So I'll leave it at that for now, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Renzo.
I'll start by endorsing what Kathleen said. The situation that she described for academia applies also outside of the academic world. It applies to the industry, it applies to government, it applies to non-for-profit organizations that are involved with the biomedical and the health area. Having said that, it's not that I needed to sugarcoat a pill for you, hopeful to find an employment, but I can assure you that biomedical research will continue. You can tell that airlines will have a major crisis. You can tell that the hotel industry will have a major crisis. You can tell that car rental companies will have a major crisis, but biomedical research will continue. Having said that, I think it's fair to say that of the traditional areas of biomedical research that have been, I should say research and practice and medical practice, that have been chronic diseases, meaning cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, neurology, and cancer. I think COVID has been a sort of ringing a bell, an alarm bell, to an area of biomedical research that was not as active in the last few years as it had been in the past. And I'm saying this from personal experience. I used to work for a company that was the leader in antibiotic research. And you know, antibiotic research has been abandoned by the majority of the industrial entities, as well as by academia in the majority of the cases. And it has been left to, if you want, a non-for-profit organization that have a particular interest in a certain type of bacterial pathology that is present in other areas of the world than North America or Europe. However, there is also this issue of the viral diseases. And after the great input that was given to this area during the HIV crisis, then once again, the antiviral research has sort of focused more on hepatitis and in a relatively limited type of effort. I think, just to give you an idea of what the job market may look like in the future, I think that it is fair to say that there will be more focus on infectious diseases. And even in this area has been not abandoned, but certainly less supported in the recent years. I would also say one thing, that there will be more interest and more focus in a level of biomedical intervention that will have to do with epidemiology, early intervention, and prevention. And these are areas that traditionally have not received the majority of the funding and the majority of the effort. Finally, I just wanted to say something that is part of my personal experience. One thing that in recruiting I've seen happening, and we have done when I was active with my company, it has been to look particularly for differentiation, meaning in the past you wanted to hire somebody in a medical department, or you wanted to hire a psychologist, or you wanted to hire a surgeon. You would go for people that have had this type of traditional training. Now, particularly when research or actually new avenues of medical management are involved, I see a lot of attention to recruit people that have different type of backgrounds: engineering, mathematics, bioinformatics, and the applications of artificial intelligence in the future will be much more frequent than it has been in the past. And here, you know, you probably have or have not heard the name of Dr. Topol. Dr. Topol is a famous cardiologist, and he recently has very innovative, very brilliant. He has worked at the Cleveland Clinic for many years. It has consulted with the FDA for many years. He's published a book, and he said, you know, in the future of the medicine, the physicians that know how to use artificial intelligence will replace those who don't. But the medical profession will still exist.
Thank you, Kathy and Renzo. This was excellent. I will probably try to follow up by addressing the angles that probably are not being covered. And there was one question about whether we found more or less competition in recent searches. And I have limited experience, of course, that are related to my field. As you heard from Caroline, I'm in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences. And our department is definitely research intensive. So that means that we get most of the funding from the NIH, I would say, or external funders, as opposed to other departments that might rely more on tuition. And I think the challenge right now is that tuition is decreasing. I just read today data showing that US colleges had a 17% drop in enrollment across the country. And that is going to impact the capacity of universities of hiring and supporting their staff and their new hires. In my experience is consistent with that. There are a lot of people that perhaps in the past would go elsewhere and now they're looking for jobs in our department. We had we had quite a few positions open in my lab. In particular, we hired 4 postdocs these past 3 or 4 months, and we have hired 2 new research assistants. And we have many more applications that I was used to see. So that, I'm not sure whether that applies also in other fields, but in our field, definitely we saw more. And there was also a question I would like to touch upon about whether the hiring freeze affects postdocs. And I would say it probably depends. In our case, in our department, certainly not, because at least at Columbia, the hiring freeze can be waived if the position is grant funded. And typically postdocs in our field are grant funded, either by a T32, a training grant, or by a research grant. So we have a free hand in hiring postdocs, and we have been hiring. So, but I'm not sure whether that is true everywhere, though in general, I would say most of biomedicine postdocs are funded by grants, so this should apply quite broadly. I don't know whether, Kathy, you had the same experience with applications coming your ways, or Renzo.
I was just shaking my head that I agree. I was going to make a similar comment. I'm glad you did that. That many postdoctoral programs are funded and are training programs, and so it may, in many institutions, it could be under something different in terms of whether it fits into a hiring freeze or not, or if it does, that an argument could be made. In that sense, those that are funded by grants, that's what they're funded by the government to do. So they want to fill those slots. They may be more competitive because other postdoc positions that were funded out of clinical dollars or other mechanisms at a university may not be as available. So I agree with Andrea. It sort of depends where the funding mechanism comes from.
I have to say that having been and being involved in the non-for-profit advocacy organization, clearly the lockdown has sort of strangled a lot of the fundraising activities that have been occurring before COVID and were the source of income for these organizations that then would devolve it to funding for salaries, for research, and so on. You can hardly see a marathon, an half marathon, a bike ride out there in these days, nor any big gathering like concerts or even medical convention. Having said that, I think it was very important, the decision that was made by NIH and NCI earlier this year to allow grant money to be allocated also to salaries in the past that was not exactly allowed very easily. I think there has been an intelligent decision made there that has allowed, for the time being, for a young investigator, young professional to continue to pursue their career.
Fantastic. That sounds like a first great round of Q&A, and if Caroline agrees, we can move to the second group.
Yeah, sure. So these set of questions are somewhat related to the first, and through the discussion, you kind of touched on some of these things, but these are a little more specific here. So from a hiring perspective, what has changed for you, if anything, because of COVID? You know, as you're looking at applications, is this different from when it was before COVID? And you talked a little bit about this. How has the funding landscape changed for hiring postdocs or other junior research in academia? And did institutes in your field suffer a hiring freeze, which we talked about? And what kind of suggestions would you give to graduating students or other junior researchers regarding the scenario, and maybe thinking a year out or thinking even 2 or 3 years out?
Renzo, would you like to start first this time?
Yeah, I can start by saying, you know, speaking as somebody that has hired and recruited people, and quite a large number in my career, I would say in that respect, nothing has changed. In that when you recruit somebody, you want, and you can take these maybe with a grain of salt or with a tongue-in-cheek type of thing. What I'm looking for is the fire in the eyes of the candidate. And I'll try to be more specific and less romantic about it. What really matters when you hire somebody is if that person has a passion for the job that he or she is applying to. And I describe passion as the realistic assessment of what the person wants, but not stopping there, paired with the realistic assessment of what that person has, and what the person has in terms of personality, in terms of skills, in terms of education. I've been taught, I've been educated to think that you start with what you have, okay? And then from that point on, you move. Having said that, and I know that here I may be contradicting or conflicting with a number of management consultant companies that tell you that when you start a job, you should be focused on your career and give you the dogma that you change your job every 5 years. Forget about it. I think that you should look for what you have and for what that means in terms of what can help you in servicing the community. In other words, a career is not the cause. Career is an effect, okay? If you're focused on your motivation and your skills, then the career will come, don't worry. And in that sense, competency is not an optional. We want to work with people that are knowledgeable or they seek knowledge in what they're doing. I'll move on to the second point, changing hiring, funding landscape, and so on. There is not only academia. One thing that has emerged quite significantly in the last few years, and again, COVID has sort of put an halt to it, as we have discussed before, but there have been new entities that have been very appealing, and these are government agencies that in the past few years have increased quite significantly their level of competence. I have a clear example. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is the government agency that regulates food and drugs. Used to be a parking lot for people that had no great ideas and not great motivation in life. It has changed dramatically over the past 10, 15 years. I think now there are scientists and researchers and individuals, their person, that are role setting for people that want to pursue history and a career in biomedical research. In the past, the NIH used to be that. At this time, the NIH has been a little bit lagging behind, but there are other government agencies that are really doing fantastic. And sometimes we don't think about that because they're not traditional. You know, now COVID is bringing up the CDC. Now, there have been agencies that, believe it or not, have been funded by the Department of Defense, not by the Department of Health and Human Services, that have done dramatic work in terms of improving and introducing dramatic improvements in the life of our patients. Just to give you a silly example, you know, the limb replacement devices that have been introduced and now allow people that have been injured in war or even in normal accidents to go back and walk. This has came out of a military project that was trying to improve the performance of soldiers. Now we have a computer machine that can be operated by eyesight. And these are tremendous help for people that have neurological disease that impair their motility and their capability. And of course, this came out of a military program that was, you know, literally, if you pass me the half joke, aiming machine guns with your eyesight. But what I'm saying is that there are a number of entities that are non-traditional, but they're extremely appealing. And I put into that also non-for-profit organization. I think that if you want to think of non-for-profit, in the past, these were, you know, the disease of the month type organization. There were fundraiser and so on. The landscape has changed dramatically. Now these organizations are able to supplement and integrate research that usually was funded only by NIH, and do that with much more flexibility and rapidity than NIH. So again, there are certain avenues that sometimes people don't think about that are actually available. And you know, now COVID is COVID, but I'm sure that we'll reopen as soon as we get through the pandemic.
Thank you. Kathy, do you want to offer your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll offer a few. I know, Andrea, this leaves you last all the time as the moderator, so I will just say.
I love that you do all the job.
Renzo, I thought you were going to say what I was going to say, but you just used a different word. I was going to say fire in the belly. So it's not nearly as romantic as eyes, but I would say I look for fire in the belly. Same sort of point. I just want to emphasize that because I think, and this is going to be, I'm going to try to weave this into the responses for the other two, which is that, let me just say this first so I don't forget to say this. I think, I am sure as you're coming to either in the middle of your studies or progression to completion, the last thing you want to hear is maybe you have a year or two of uncertainty that you've gone through, you know, so much and you're ready to be finished and move on. And I'm sure that that will happen in time. However, it may be that building on some of the points Renzo was making is maybe it's not the traditional path you thought last year. Like maybe it's the openness to considering what, if there aren't academic openings, what kind of community-based openings, or thinking about what might actually still be reflective of what the fire in your belly is, like what drives you and what do you want to do, even if it's not exactly what you thought you would do the moment you finished your degrees or your postdocs. I will just say as an aside, I remember like my first week of my first faculty position, I went home and said, really, did I do all this for this? You know, I mean, even when you get what you want, you're like, wow, okay, now this is what day-to-day is like. I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just saying that there are times that you have an idea of exactly what's going to happen, and this might be a reframe of what you do to stay on that path, but maybe take a slightly different one. And I wanted to say that first before this other point, because when I think about what has changed, or what suggestions do I have, that I feel, and maybe this is my, you know, my perspective as a social behavioral scientist, but as I mentioned first, I think that I would say in terms of what someone looks for and what particular skill sets, I completely agree that we're looking for more interdisciplinary people, people that work together, people that are problem solvers, people that really know how to create and integrate AI with mental health, or things that, you know, that we don't necessarily think of as the traditional trajectory, which I imagine in your careers will be the typical trajectory of combining different fields and having different skill sets, or pursuing. And I've certainly often said this to my doctoral students, that if you have an opportunity to do a postdoc, to do something different, do it. Right? Like one I have in mind is someone who before cognitive neuroscience became so big in psychology, she said, do you think I should veer off this path now and get fMRI training? Or should I wait till mid-career? And I said, do it now, because when you get mid-career, you're in a pattern. And so maybe one way to think about what you might do if you don't quite find the perfect position you want is what opportunities might be out there that would be different, but will feed in, you know, to your path. The other point I would make as a social scientist is that I thought of this, Renzo, when you were talking about, I forget exactly what it was now, but I've worked in AIDS since 1987, and I think of it as my decades of, first decade, no treatment, second, you know, everyone died, second decade, we thought we had treatment, but it wasn't accessible, and it wasn't until we viewed AIDS as a threat to our national security that we started to work globally, really, and PEPFAR came to be. And all these social and political things happened while the fantastic basic science, biomedical science, was creating treatment for us. And so now, as a mental health and prevention researcher, and mostly in South Africa, everything I do has viral suppression as the endpoint, even if it's a mental health intervention. So I've kept the same path for over 30 years, but depending on what's happening in my field, my research has changed. And I just want to say that this is what I hope will be. It's hard to imagine a benefit of COVID, but as we say at Mailman, we're building back better. That's our goal. Like, how are we going to build back better? And I hope we build back better by acknowledging the political and the social, and realizing how that fits into the way we even think about science. I mean, that's what I'm pushing my department of social scientists from. How can we advance social science to really eliminate structural racism, not just talk about what we can do. So because of COVID and disparities and inequities and injustices, social and political issues, it can really drive our field. And so I'm just wanting you to try to think a little bit to the future when we're in the middle of these times that we could never have imagined living through, to think about how that might impact your careers. And I know that doesn't necessarily alleviate anxiety in the short term, but I guess what I would say for a suggestion is, what is something that, you know, if you don't quite get the position you want, what might you do that will then advance what you had thought you want to do, and might that take you down a path. I mean, I will say I went to graduate school to work in cancer, and then I met my first AIDS patient in 1987, and, you know, never looked back, totally different trajectory, you know. So I mean, same field, but really different focus than what I intended. So I guess that I was trying to weave in the impact of COVID and what kind of suggestions to think about in the current scenarios.
That was really great. The other things I would like to add, trying to address some of these questions, is hiring freeze. I think we touched upon earlier, but I would like to say that they don't affect postdocs that much, but they might affect faculty hires, because faculty hires most often are funded through university money, and those might, for instance, at Columbia, we cannot hire anyone or it's very hard to hire someone if we want to use our department funding. Though, I mean, we have been able to post positions because we have some external funds we can use, but in general, certainly we have less freedom than what we had last year. And something about, I would like to also touch upon the question of what to do, how to go about in this situation. And I think I will go back to some of the things that both Kathy and Renzo just said, which is there are areas that are growing. In general, biomedical research is not shrinking. To the opposite, the COVID funding, at least in academia, is increasing biomedical research. So for those of you who want to do research, that is good news. There are fields that are growing more than others, and particularly viruses. Clearly, research on viruses, especially respiratory viruses at this point, is growing. But also, I would like to spotlight what Renzo said earlier. In our field as well, data are becoming incredibly important. So if you have the opportunity, if you are at a crossroad where you want to decide whether to jump into learning data skills or not, data are very helpful to find a good postdoc and a good job. I mean, the most important invention, I joke with my colleagues and my trainees, the most important invention of the past 30 years have been computers. And the computers, it means you can do quite a lot with data. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that when I took my first biostatistics class, they had us do statistics by hand, like with pen and paper, which today would be ridiculous. But that means that, especially with the computational power we have now, that really means we can do much more than we used to do. And this has been growing exponentially. I think data science is on everyone's lingo today. And also, I would like to say another point, and this actually I'm taking one of Kathy's cards here, is that I think many universities are trying to hire faculty members who will work on health equity and who do research on marginalized populations, especially because many universities are very sensitive to the social tensions and the social injustice that we have in America with racism, structural racism. So for instance, we have had a lot of discussion in our department about doing hires on in environmental justice, which is one aspect of health equity. You may know that environmental pollutants affect everyone, but they are much worse for populations of color and people with low income. And so this type of research now has become much more urgent in our field. And that is all I had. I'm looking at Renzo and Kathy, whether there is any other thoughts to share, or we can move to the next set of questions. And I'm realizing we only have 2 minutes to answer the next set of questions. So I'll give 1 minute to Kathy and 1 minute to Renzo.
Sorry, Andrea. I was reading the question in the chat. Did you ask me something specific to respond to?
No.
Okay.
No, we're good. We can go to the next
Okay.
set, which is about skills and knowledge that I think we kind of addressed a little bit what we want to do. Networking, how is this important? And how uncertainty can be a source of inspiration.
And just to keep an eye on time, if maybe a couple words about this, and then we want to open it up to the Q&A.
So quick 30 seconds thoughts about any of these issues. Kathy, do you want to start?
Sure. I'll just, I would say, let me just quickly say, I mean, I think networking obviously still matters. I mean, it just has to be done in a different way for now, but hopefully will improve in that situation. I did notice a couple of questions or comments about role models and mentors in the chat. And I think that certainly thinking about the value of hopefully access to mentors and networks through that is still something that can happen even if you're not able to go to conferences or sort of the way you think about meeting people. So I'll stop there so people can ask their questions. I guess I tried to talk about the uncertainty being an inspiration and growth kind of indirectly in the prior section. So I'll let it go at that.
Renzo, any thoughts on this?
Very quickly, since I only have 1 minute, but I want to say two things. One about networking. Networking is very important. And, if you think of the past traditional organization of medical or scientific conferences, I used to say with a joke, people that attend these conferences, they're divided in two categories. The people that are inside the room and taking notes from every single slide, and the people that are outside the room that are discussing next year results. Now, I think the problem with COVID is that the type of human interaction that for me is one of the most valuable aspects of medical convention is going to be damaged and affected, and that worries me. On the other hand, you can say, well, by doing, I had a conversation actually, with, believe it or not, with Tony Fauci and Dr. Collins at the NIH. They were saying, well, we waste much less time in airports or in hotel where we cannot sleep because we're doing everything by Zoom now, and we gain a lot of time, and we have much more time to do our research now. So there are pluses and minuses. But the other thing that I wanted to say that I believe is extremely important is the fact that when you get into a job, into an organization, into a career, it's very, very important that you identify, you've used the word mentor. I use the word educator rather than a teacher. That may be your boss, may not be your boss, but it has to be somebody that you trust and somebody with whom you can have an open and free conversation about the real problems that you're facing in your career. That's an aspect that Zoom or not Zoom, COVID or not COVID, must not be eliminated, because that's the only place by which we can grow humanly and professionally.
Thank you so much, Renzo. And so we have about 15 minutes for Q&A, and there are many questions in the chat. And Caroline, just checking whether you want me to go through or you are doing that for us.
Yeah, I can do it. So I'm just going to scroll to the top for the first question. Okay, so this was one that was just briefly addressed, but if anyone wants to add on to this, someone asked, how important are the presence of role models in the biomedical arena regarding attraction of individuals into academia or industry?
Anyone wants to start?
I'll start with the provocative statement. In my career, I have known and met personally quite a number of Nobel Prize winners. And I can tell you that they divide into categories. The one that winning the Nobel Prize damaged their brain, and the one that instead are true mentors, educators, and innovators. And but I think that brings me back to what I was saying before. I was talking about the fire in the eye. You know, there is something in the culture of this country, which is part of the folk culture, is a gospel that is titled "Keep the Eyes on the Prize." The people that keep the eye on the prize are people that are connected with reality and with the motivation by which they face reality. And that allows them to interrogate reality, which is what we do when we do research of any kind, medical and not medical. And to me, that's the critical thing.
Kathy, do you want to add to that?
I'm trying to figure out how to respond. I think, I mean, that's an excellent comment, Renzo. I mean, I had been thinking when I saw this question, I actually read it a couple times because I was trying to figure out what I thought it meant. I read a couple different interpretations of the question. So I'll just say briefly, and it can be clarified by the person that wrote it if they want. I mean, I think of a role model as essential in the sense like I can see myself going there, right? So I think I really distinguish a mentor from a role model where I think that they can be both. But I think you can have peers who are role models. You can have people outside your field who are role models in terms of like what you might aspire to be. I think it can be helpful. I mean, I would hope that my students would think of me as a good mentor and maybe a role model, but maybe not, because I often selected students who I really liked their ideas. They often didn't end up working in my field. They learned from me and worked with me, but went another direction. And so I think that having other role models other than mentors is essential. But I think, and it all depends from where you come, I would say a little philosophically. I think depending on where your motivation comes from and what you know as exemplars to be able to seek really varies depending on how many role models you've seen and if there are role models out there that exemplify something that is really outside the norm, that can really be a role model. If you think about where, you know, somebody who's really a trendsetter and innovator, as we were saying earlier, that fields are constantly changing in different ways. And so I think role model, I don't know if that's what the question was exactly, but that's what came to mind.
And thinking about Renzo's response that there are some potential role models that are amazing. I mean, some are plums and some are prunes, apparently. I think it's important to keep in mind when you apply, and especially when you interview, that the interview is bidirectional. They are interviewing you, but they are also interviewing them. So I think it's important to ask to speak with the future colleagues, if you're applying for a postdoc, to speak with other postdocs and get their feeling about how it is life in that lab or department. If you're applying for a faculty position, with other junior faculty members. And also, this is also where the network comes handy, because many times you hear ideas and thoughts about other departments and people through friends that might know other people. So I think a network where you get to know indirectly the place where you want to apply for is important as well. I think there is a lot that you can get from people who have been in touch, collaborating with a certain person.
I would add actually one thing to that, because you know, people usually are tempted in selecting places to apply you know, it's natural that you want to apply to the top places, the Harvard, the Yale, the Stanford, the you name, the Columbia, I'm sorry, you name it. The reality is that it wouldn't hurt to pay some attention to institutions that still have a focus and still care about education or about training. Sometimes you join the top-notch laboratory and you end up working 23 hours a day on a specific project that may not really help you early in your career to round up your skills and your knowledge in the appropriate way. So I think that's something that should be kept in mind when you are, you know, newly graduated or a young person and you are applying for a job.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Perhaps, Caroline, we can move to the next.
Sure. So someone asked a question here. Can anyone speak to what the job market might look like for international NGOs or research in international settings?
And so this sounds like it's for you.
Yeah, you know, I've been involved and still am involved in a number of NGO. Couple of things. And this is pre-COVID, and it has suffered from COVID. In this country, there has been a tremendous amount of philanthropy that has supported quite significant amount of funding for jobs, not necessarily only research, but for jobs in the area of philanthropy, if you want, or social work, or healthcare, you name it. So that's one thing. Traditionally, the U.S. government has been a strong supporter of that through USAID. Also, NIH, believe it or not, is still the major source of funding for biomedical research, much more than the pharmaceutical industry, no matter what people may think. But the point is that, again, diversification is something that is valuable. And here, I think what is important to say, diversification may be also geographic diversification. There are ways by which the same problem is faced in different parts of the world that are different. They're not necessarily the way we approach them in the United States, or not necessarily in the way they're approached in other places. And you learn from that. And I'll give you just an example, because rather than speaking, it's much more important to give you an example. You know that when somebody wants to gain access to an experimental drug, traditionally in the US, the FDA has been the policeman of the situation. So they wanted traditionally to make sure that whoever asks for an experimental drug is not being hurt. Things are changing now. If you go to the equivalent of the FDA in Canada, which used to be called the Health Protection Branch, now it's called the Health Canada. There, the approach is philosophically different. They are the one that ask the manufacturer for access to an experimental drug on behalf of the patient. So you see, the problem is the same. The philosophical approach might be very different. And you learn from this type of things. And I have to say that the FDA has learned this and has changed significantly in the last few years. But again, just as an example.
Thank you. Kathy, you had?
Yeah, I would just add that I think about the international NGOs. I think there's great opportunity in those settings, as well as collaboration. You know, if you're in an academic situation globally, I think we still have some of the same concerns. Can we get there? Can we fly there? Where's the funding come from? But it's kind of similar to my other response, which is that I mean, unfortunately, many other countries are doing a lot better than we are. Like, you know, my South African colleagues, we can go to the townships now and start our research. You know, they've got COVID under better control. You know, so there's this question of being on research pause, and that doesn't for me the practicality is, when can I fly there? Thank goodness I have great collaborators there. So I think that it's a similar response. Mine is a similar response to other comments, which is it's somewhat country and region specific. What is going to be the consequence, and whether the United States, you know, we hope continues relationships and co-funding and everything that we've had in the past. But I think that COVID is also, like I parallel to HIV, is really about justice and communication, and it's purely global. And so I actually think, I mean, I'm a global health person, so I think that that's essential, and that will continue. It may have challenges for funding as well, but I think the need couldn't be greater. And if that's your motivation, I think, and what you'd like to see yourself do, that it's worth the effort to figure out how to continue to make that happen.
And if I can add one quick thing to that, clearly the access to global data is a must in a reality where we learn more and more and more and more about genomics, about our patients and so on. And it becomes evident that patient population are getting so segmented that you know, whoever lives in Chattanooga is not going to be enough to find out anything at all about the disease or a gene and so on. But also looking at differences, I think, is an enrichment for the increase of our knowledge. And we should look with this eye to this. It's not only a matter of numbers or efficiency, it's a matter of learning.
And I would just briefly add to that. I think it's certainly in my field of mental health, we sort of developed the field of global mental health because of the lack of mental health specialists or treatment available. And we've learned an enormous amount about how to deliver mental health treatment in low resource settings that don't have any providers, that we hope comes back to the United States. Just saying what you said, Renzo, that it's often people are, and global health driven by students is really leading the decolonization question. And so what's decolonization in development, and how do we think about our collaborations? And all of those things matter in the way we think about doing research. And I've always approached it as hopefully we learn that it's a true collaboration as opposed to we're bringing something somewhere else, because as you say, Renzo, settings are different, and I think that will continue to be a priority, I hope.
So thank you so much. This has been really incredibly helpful. I learned a lot myself by hearing the others speak, and I hope you did the same. Unfortunately, we are at the top of the hour. We could go on for another hour, I feel, but we are at the top of the hour, and we want to wrap up. I would like to tell you a couple of things, a couple of suggestions. One, while I was hearing all the questions and the answers and the discussion, it came to mind that with so much uncertainty, it's great to have people who can help. It's great to have mentors. And if you're interested in one of the sponsors of tonight's event, the Ergon Hub, is a community of volunteers who are happy to talk with you, with any of you who reaches out about career choices. So feel free to look at the website. Razib put it in the chat, and feel free to shoot an email. And there are many professionals both in the industry and academia who will be happy to meet with you. And everything we do is free of charge and completely powered by volunteers, like tonight's event. And the other thing is that pretty aptly, Razib and his team organized another event, which seems to be an amazing segue to tonight's event, which is interviewing for jobs. And this is going to be on October 28th at 8 p.m. like tonight, so in 2 weeks, and we will have a professional headhunter discussing how to prepare an interview for jobs. So Said that, I would like to thank very much Kathy and Renzo for being with us tonight, and also, of course, Caroline and Razib for organizing the event. And I hope you enjoyed it and it was helpful to you. Let us know any comment, and we'll see you soon on the same screen. Have a good night, everyone.